1930 model Chevrolet.
1930, yeah.
As you mentioned, the very first person you saw was a guy in there, but he probably was running the Super Service garage at that time.
That's right.
And perhaps what did you pull in there for gas or for directions or what?
I pulled in there, I saw him, and I asked him just where the Lutheran church was. And he told me going up a little further and I could find it.
You could see the spire, the old high spire from below town coming up. That would have been on the old road, or, yeah, no. In 35, we had the concrete highway in then. So I'm very familiar. I was old enough in 1935 to have, I lived here in town myself at that time, so I would have a recollection of precisely how it looked. Then you went to give your trial sermon at Beaver Springs that evening. When was this again?
This was in November.
November of 1935.
November 35.
And then did the members vote? Apparently they did.
Yes, they voted. And the next week I got a call from Mr. Charles Haynes telling me that I had been accepted and asking when I could come down and talk with him. And I think I came back the next Sunday or the Sunday after and conducted a service then. I had to come alone.
How did you serve notice to your other charge that you were leaving them?
You have to give them a notice. That,
a couple of weeks, I would presume.
You usually write up, make it as easy as you can on them that you've been called under the charge and expect to move. That's been the hardest part of my life, separating myself from people, especially young people. All my ministry, I've been in close contact with young people, and up there at Blairsville, the young people would come on, let's go out and hunt some wildflowers, my wife. Let's go up here on the hill on the toboggan this evening and have a ride, and let's go out skating. And when you get in close with that, three groups of young people, and then finally say, well, now this is it, I'm going to go. And then the parents can tell you that next week, I'm telling you, our kids came home and they were bawling their heads off the whole way home. It just
heart-rending.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can sense that. So you had to leave there, though. Well, I mean, you had to give them notice that you were coming.
Yeah.
And when did you move to our area then?
I moved then in November. I don't know exactly the date. I know we couldn't move the week we wanted to because one of the kiddies had some kind of a children's disease.
One of your children?
Yeah.
Oh, well, let's touch upon that then. Let's first go back to your wife. What was her complete maiden name? And
my wife's maiden name was Marion Alice Dim.
D-I-M-M.
Right.
And when were you married? June
the
2nd, 1932, down in Gettysburg.
No.
Oh, that's right, up at Blairsville.
At Van Dyke.
Oh, at Van Dyke.
Our little church.
Oh, okay.
My home church.
Right. And when was your first child born?
First child was born in July 24, 1935.
July the 24th, 1935.
Oh, wait a minute. I'm wrong. September 24, 1935. That was Shirley.
Shirley Deppen.
Shirley.
What was her middle name?
Shirley May.
Shirley May Deppen.
Right.
And we might as well complete your family.
Patty Lee Deppen was born July 24, 1937.
1937.
She was born in Beavertown.
In Beavertown?
Beavertown.
And where was Shirley born?
Shirley was born in Muncie.
Up in Muncie, so you were still up in Lycoming County. Okay, so you couldn't move for 1 week or so because Shirley had a childhood disease.
That's right.
So, but later in November you came to our area and moved into Parsonage, which was in Beaver Springs, and you had two churches, Beavertown and Beaver Springs. discharged than where you had served.
Yes.
I hate to probe, but what was your beginning salary here?
$1,200.
1,200 really jumped up. I mean, that's a 20% increase. So, and of course the parsonage and a few other things, but no.
I don't know whether people would be interested in the experiences of a birth of a child or not, but we were had unusual circumstances. As I said, our parsonage was 7 miles back among the hills, dirt roads, muddy roads. In the fall of the year, sometimes the bridges would wash out, or they become so muddy that you just couldn't hardly get through. So that the people were concerned about this young preacher's wife, that something might happen and she wouldn't get to the hospital. So our doctor was a lady doctor, and she said, "You come in and stay with me in Muncie." And then I remember on late Saturday night, I got a call, and Dr. Hall said, "We're going into the hospital and about to go into the delivery room. We think you ought to be here." And I drove in, and sometime around 2:30 or 3:30 that morning, sure, the doctor came out of her room with a little bundle and put it in my arms and said, "This is yours." And I looked down and I saw the prettiest little girl in all the world, and I went in a room and stood beside a bed and looked down at one who was tired and weak and spent, and I kissed my wife and said, "I want to thank you, dear, for the most precious gift that any woman can ever give to any man in the whole world." And I can't forget that experience.
Glad you shared it with us, and many people who will appreciate that. Of course, I knew your daughter Shirley. I was ahead of her in school by 4 years, but she was grew up to be a strong, healthy young lady. She was a star basketball player and a fine athlete, and so that beautiful young lady you're referring to certainly was an intelligent, charming, and just well endowed person mentally and physically. And so is Patty, of course, but I didn't know her as well as being a younger lady. Well, now we've covered your coming here, and we've covered your marriage and your family. Perhaps what we ought to...
Might say something about this is on, but about Patty too. We were living here, and we wanted the same doctor for Patty, and that was Dr. Hall in Muncie. And so I don't know what time during the night things began to happen, and we had no telephone. I went to the neighbors, and I called Dr. Hall, and she said, "You better get started up here as soon as you can." So I picked the little girl up and took her over to Lettuce and Luther, and put her in bed with them, and went down to get my car to discover that somebody had been trying to steal my car that night.
Up at Beaver Springs.
The garage door was open, the car door was open, the lights were on, and I think the only thing that saved us was the fact that Mr. Mitchell had come home late that night and drove up by and probably scared the person away. Otherwise, we might not have had a car when we needed it.
When was Patty born?
Patty was born in 37.
Yeah, but what month?
July.
See, in those days there were hobos traveling our area, but then there were gypsies traveling through, and the carnival people were notorious for doing this sort of thing. And this was really at the height of the Depression then, if it would have been 1937.
Yeah.
But
and we also had a boy at I'm not mentioning the name, we had a boy in Beaver Springs at that time was on a rampage of stealing and causing all kinds of trouble then.
He may have been.
I think he's the person who did it. So we got in the car, and it was a beautiful moonlight night. We drove the whole way to Muncie, and the doctor came out to the car and examined my wife and said, "You better get on quick to the Williamsport." So I said, "I'll be there waiting for you." And that's where it was.
That's where Patty came into this world, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's nice. You, of course, had many baptisms and in your 50 years of ministry, but just could you share with us approximately how many weddings and baptisms and funerals and other ceremonies you've had in your charge in the general area?
Uh, in my 50 years of ministry, I've had 679 baptisms. I've received 885 new members. I've conducted 498 funerals, and I've had 248 weddings.
I don't know how to react to that because I can't quite comprehend what those numbers mean.
The amazing thing to me is, in that small parish where we started, I said there were 3 small churches, small congregations, 30 members, 60 members. I baptized 87 children, and I took 119 members into the church.
While you were there in
those
that
3
short
years.
time.
And I did something then which I suppose I broke the law. I went around to all the schools. I would go to one school at noontime, another school in the evening, and there were 7 schools right around there. And I went to each of those schools and conducted a catechetical class. And
well, it would be contrary to the wishes of the Supreme Court today, but in those days it certainly wasn't. So there was no violation of the law in that.
I think that accounts to this, because the parents would say to me, what in the world are you doing with these young people? All they want to do is sit around and read their Bible and study their catechisms. I said, well, I'm trying to help them all I can.
Get in the kingdom.
Yeah. So
that's interesting.
I could have had a lot more, but I'm glad I had that many.
Yeah, well, 112 in that small area in that short time certainly shows the zeal that you had for shepherding the flock.
That's right.
And that's really what your main responsibility was as a pastor, and has remained.
In that Lawrenceville church, I never conducted a communion service without baptizing or receiving somebody. And the first Easter Sunday, I had a group of young people that extended clear across the front of the church, and that was my 3rd service that evening, and I lost my voice, and I couldn't talk for one whole week after.
I've never heard that. That would have been unique, because you have always had a very fine presence.
I couldn't talk above a whisper for a whole week.
Well, I don't want to make light of it, because that's very important to communicate. But that was the very beginning.
That's
the
right.
very beginning. Did you ever have that trouble ever?
No.
Never had that sense, right?
No.
No. You've always been a very good shepherd.